Okay, thank you for being here at the festival's last event, which is the second of our two headline readings, this one featuring WIlly Palomo and Shanan Ballam. Thank you so much for being here, and especially for your presence and your interest. I'm Lisa Bickmore. I'm the Poet Laureate of the state of Utah. The festival was initiated by my predecessor, Paisley Rectal. Support for the festival comes from the Division of Arts and Museums, Utah Humanities, and a fellowship from the Academy of American Poets. I'm really appreciative of the support of Harper Elder, who is a student at Westminster University, who will be helping with managing the Zoom tonight. Um, so I'm going to introduce our first reader, who is WIlly Palomo. He, they, she, a founding member of Plumas Colectiva, a powerhouse of Latinx visual artists, writers, and creatives based in the 801. A veteran of the Salt Lake City poetry slam scene, his fiction, essays, poetry, and translations can be found across print and web pages, including the Best New Poets 2018, Latino Rebels, The Wandering Song, Central American Writing in the United States, and more. Born in Brooklyn, New York, and raised in Utah, he is the queer son of two refugees from El Salvador. In April 2023, he independently released his debut rap album, Entered a Boom Bow. Is it Boom Bow?
Boombo, but you're good.
Bummer. I thought to myself I should check that first. Boombo. In September 2023, he published his debut collection of poetry, Wake the Others, with editorial Kalina and Glass Spider Publishing. Welcome, WIlly. We will now mute ourselves and close our video feeds and let WIlly read.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Lisa. I'm just gonna get started. Unos inditos somos, hijos de Cuscatlán. Mama used to sing me this lullaby whenever I cried as a baby. I have never heard it elsewhere, and she can no longer remember the words, but sometimes, when I can't sleep, I mumble her melody until I'm out. Mama was never good at singing. Her voice breaks sharp on almost every note, wavering, bold, and uncertain, full of a soft vulnerability lost inside her mouth. For years, I watched her hum hymnos at sacrament meetings, her illiterate eyes darting over the text, stuttering, struggling to read and sing at the same time. It always felt like the pianist was the one interrupting her. The piano didn't know what a prayer should sound like. Mama holds La Biblia the way you hold a song in your chest, mouthing words like hijo and Dios. She can barely sound them out, but she knows what they mean. Those words quake inside her, a red-eyed truth, a cherry-wet wound. I hear it when she prays at night, especially when it's for me. I'm starting off the reading by reading poems from Wake the Others, which we are able to publish through Editorial Kalina, which is a press in El Salvador, and Glass Spider Publishing, which is an independent press over in Ogden, for a bilingual edition. And it's the story of my mother's life, essentially through my poems. As a survivor of the Salvadoran Civil War, as an undocumented refugee into the United States, it just tells her story. And also, I had the need to write it because it was impossible to understand who I was and like how my people ended up in Utah without it. And I owe being a poet through my mother, who in the last poem I mentioned, the word illiterate, she learned how to read through the Bible and the Book of Mormon in her 20s and as she was raising us. And this poem talks a little bit about my relationship to that as someone who fell in love with reading at an early age and who is now a writer. How I learned to read. Are you me, mama? Beckoned the birdie in our favorite book. Cuddled and coddled, I want to brag, decirte that she read to me the most every night. Except, if you ask mama, it was faith not education, not knowledge, but the Holy Ghost, which gave her the power to understand the scriptures when she, humiliated, confessed to the missionaries she didn't know how to read. It never occurred to me until just now that if her story is true, then she never actually read me anything as a kid. She must have looked at the letters and saw nothing but another endless maze of streets and signs, another nameless map of New York, left to navigate on pure faith and instinct. She'd interpret pictures the same way she'd memorize streets, the same way she'd read quiet gringos smirking as she passed. In first grade, I made it my goal to teach her to read. I took out all our books in front of guests, spilling a library of shame into the room. I'd correct her English the same way I'd correct her children's stories, the same way I now write her story under a language she will never call home. There's not a word for her verdad in English, no matter how many times I try write it down. From a country where poets are executed and literacy meant little more than signing away your name next to an X, she taught me how to walk without zapatos, to read without an alphabet shackling my tongue. Something that I need to acknowledge reading this book of poems about a survivor of what was an attempt at a revolutionary war in Central America in the 1970s and 80s, and really much before that as well, is that we're undergoing a genocide right now in Palestine. And I wouldn't be in this country if it wasn't for US funding a right-wing military that was running things in El Salvador, if it wasn't for Israeli arms going into El Salvador um, and crushing an attempt at people to liberate themselves and to be able to live lives of dignity. Plumas Colectiva released a statement in solidarity with Palestine that I'm going to read just to give people context for the next poem. In the case of the Salvadoran conflict, a civil war between the right-wing land-owning class supported by a particularly violent military pitted against left-wing popular organizations, the Israelis were present from the beginning. Besides arms sales, they helped train Ancesal, the secret police who were later to form the framework of the infinite death squads that would kill tens of thousands of mostly civilian activists. From 1975 to 1979, 83% of El Salvador's military imports came from Israel, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. By 1981, many of those in the civilian popular political movements who had survived the death squads headed for the hills to become guerrillas. Even though the US was openly backing the Salvadoran army by 1981, as late as November 1983, it was asking for more Israeli practical assistance there, according to declassified secret documents obtained recently by Al Jazeera. Among the assistance asked for were helicopters, trucks, rifles, ammunitions, and combat infantry advisors to work at both the company and battalion level of the Salvadoran army. One notable Salvadoran officer trained by Israelis was Major Roberto de Abusin, who always held a high opinion of the Israelis. It was Major de Abusin who ordered the assassination of El Salvador's Archbishop Oscar Romero, amongst thousands of other murders. Later, he would organize the right-wing National Republican Alliance Party Arena and send his son to study abroad in the relative safety of Israel. This poem is called Mama's Arms. Mama's arms fight one another to death. Whipping, welding, they corkscrewed. Black-eyed wrists morphed and hissed into barrels, shoulder blades, pistol grip into militant hands. Bullets spilled drunk from bony magazines, skins glow metallic. Soldiers cup arms behind backs. backs, firearms into the baby blue where they fall half-born as warnings. Arms are why my tia's head hid in barriles de frijol and left abuelo for dead in the street. Why Tio Toño slept on rooftops as soldiers beat down the doors at midnight. Why mama played dead when two soldiers stepped on the bus and asked where they were, las comunistas, and an arm pointed at her red basket of fruit and tore the air like a flag over tres campesinas, inditas, pobres, como cualquiera. Soldiers sling arms over their back, and mama chokes back to life beside two dead girls who swallowed bullets meant for her body, a savage Lazarus, her arms crawling, multiplying out of the earth for vengeance. Arms are why mis primos' bellies disappear like buses down dirt roads. Why they had to flee the country. Why deportation is a death sentence. Y ya no conocemos nuestro Salvador. Mama Tierra, I need to know these are not your arms. Your arms are not made of metal. Your arms do not come from the United States or the Soviets. Your arms are not arena or communist. They do not know the word revolucion. Your arms are not Mara or 18. They do not belong to Pandilla or Partido. Your arms are my mother's, the ones that taught me how to fold mine in prayer, a dar gracias a Dios por otra día de vida, por los alimentos, the same ones that cradled me como una bomba, my wet black hair a fuse you refused to put out, the same arms that begged me to return to El Salvador, praying, shaking me awake from nightmares. Despiértate, mijo. Wake up. Flipping over to another poem in the collection called Witness. 1 second. This is from the perspective of my mother. Papi punched holes on the tops of the barrels so we could breathe, but none to see. So I can't say I saw the battalion. I can't say I saw the men. Or were they boys? Tear a white flag from Papi's shirt and stomp on his chest as if putting out a fire. There was no fire, just Papi, grunting and swearing there was no one left in our shack. No sons to make soldiers, no daughters to make single mothers. This is how Papi protected us. He made us wear his jeans instead of faldas, so soldiers found us, we'd be harder to rape. He beat us when we spoke back or said achis. He taught us to cook sopitas y arroces y tamalitos so one day we could be good wives. The world is unjust to unmarried women, he said. And thus, we learned to suffer. Good daughters, we listened, always, even as the soldiers revved their cackling engines to run him over again, even when our men cheated on us again and again. Papi should have died that day. It took one man to stand between him and the soldiers. It took one man to yell stop and defend his good name in English. Witness is a translation of martyr. In Spanish, testificar comes from wagering your flesh on the truth. Power forgets some of us survived to tell the story. The man lived. The soldiers fled. Papi lived, and slowly we massaged his ribs back into place. For weeks, we put warm milk on his tongue. The swelling stopped. He relearned how to walk. Some of his daughters still hide in barriles de frijol. Others are mastering the art of walking away. I'm going to transition away from the book into some other poems. And part of what I want to do right now is a quick land acknowledgement that in Utah, we're in the land of the Shoshone, the Ute, the Paiute, the Goshu, the Dene, many indigenous nations who have cared for the lands and protected it for time immemorial. The next poems that I'm reading are really indebted to Darren Perry, a Shoshone genius whose book, The Bear River Massacre, talks about the largest massacre in the United States of Native Americans, which happens, heading towards Idaho, the Utah area, and the Bear River. This poem is a way of talking about the settler colonial project, which is the United States, and how that plays out in Utah, which is an important connection to make, especially with the conversations we need to be having about the ongoing genocide. A poem about Washakie or Missouri. Our houses are not all they burned. Angel hot faith tearing through blouses, horses, books of Mormon. We tried to shut our eyes, but bullet holes don't have eyelids. Neither does God. We left behind a temple, or perhaps the temple left us. Fires so cold, whole families shiver. The ash is black. The ash is white. Haunted by the Holy Ghost, we lost everything but hope. A tarred thing with feathers and broken ribs. A ghost town our spirits never left. Blue, pink, and white. The lake at sunset is the color of a trans flag. Here we are, two salty bitches refusing to apologize for our stink. Don't mind the flies, honey. They don't harm nobody. Like you, our microbes have learned how to survive where almost no one else can. We outlast salt crystals and desert theocracies. Got peeps saying we might even survive on Mars, boo. You know, we've always been alien. Here, the male bison will mount one another just as much as they do they gals. You ain't seen eyeliner till you seen our grebes. Don't know laughter lest you've been out tricking with coyotes. We got cow pies better than the hair on some of these legislatures. Our eyes are the most glamorous mirrors, and they mad they still ugly. Tell Jay the real Jay's called and said ain't no such thing as a cute billionaire. You got tar on your hands, Cox. You got tar on your face, Jeffrey Holland. Me, I got a beaver, swans, avocets, butch-ass bison, a city full of queers and natives who know my real name. You want hoops? I got a whole jetty. You want a flag? Look into the sky. Who you know got all these birds flocking all the way from Canada to La Pita de Chile? Who you know as feathered, as hooved as my people? Who you know die this beautiful us? A history I want to share about the lake. We all have our differing relationships with it. But one that has struck me in the past years is the story of Aslan, which is like this mythic story from the Mexica, which like in US schools you'll learn of as like the Aztecs. But they have a migration story that they come from a lake with an island in it where a whole bunch of birds and cranes would be. And that's where their migration story begins. And in a lot of the Chicano movement, as it was happening, people would try to figure out where this lake was. And it was Dr. Roberto Sidney Rodriguez who had suspicions that it was the Great Salt Lake. And, he had his reasons, not like concrete evidence or proof. But I think an important part for a lot of Latina people, when we think about our relationships to environment, to Utah as a space, of course, like prior to becoming a state, US being a part of Mexico, and prior to that, and currently right now, still being Shoshone, Dene, Paiute, Goshu, Ute land. Um, it's important to acknowledge these relationships that folks have to this land, and Latinos like imagining their ancestors in this land, which also has a lot of truth in it. Like the Uto-Aztecan language family extends all the way from Utah all the way down to El Salvador, where my ancestors spoke Nahuatl. And the borders that exist today were not present for so many millennia. They're very new things. Nation states are very new things. For me, it's important to acknowledge the overlap of how, what for many people is just an environmental like concern and struggle, and like the overlaps that it has. One of those is with systems like the prison system, right? And I want to go there to talk about how, like, the prison moving to being on the wetlands of the lake, and how that puts it out of mind and out of way for like folks who don't want to think about prisons, as well as like leading to like a lot of the people who are incarcerated therein, like dealing with just like mosquito bites all over. um, how that's a connection that where there's an overlap between the environmental racism there and like our concerns and love for the lake. I'm also thinking about how immigrant detention centers are funded by the same people who, um, are building prisons, who are the same people who are building borders. And I want to read a poem about my father, um, who came here and documented fleeing a US funded civil war. And this poem is called Where Papi's Angel Speaks from an Immigrant Detention Center. I use my shoes as pillows, as if to say my dreams are far from here, as if to say I am ready to leave at any moment. Use my shoes as pillows and whisper evening prayers into the souls so they follow me the next day. Use my shoes as pillows and let the heels dig into my face so when I return, everyone will see the countries I have crossed. Use my shoes as pillows and untie its tongue. Hold it to my ear like a lover's and listen to her mumble of dirt shift inside. Use my shoes as pillows and peek through the holes to create my own night sky. Use my shoes as pillows and wiggle my toes off the edge of the bed like a tree. And remember how once I let my chancla fall like fruit, how now I must be ready to bruise fist and face for this torn pair of shoes, ready to run through another noon, through the soles and the skin on my feet. And that's a poem that's again in Wake the Others. Um, I'm going to read two more poems. And part of what I also want to acknowledge is that it's 420 today, which, like, haha, like holiday that folks sometimes celebrate about marijuana. But connecting it back to the prison systems we were talking about, um, there's currently people making billions, frequently people who weren't criminalized when weed was more widely illegal. There's plenty of people who are currently still incarcerated for nonviolent drug crimes related to weed, for something that people are just making loads of money from. disproportionately Black communities and also Latinx communities and Native communities. And I wanted to call that into the air since we are doing this reading on 420. Weed has also been like monumental to like the healing of like the PTSD of many people I know, which just like creates this just profound absurdity and just the fact that we are still ruining people's lives um, for selling marijuana. Um, with that, I'm gonna read this poem. Um, Terrorists are those people who build deportation prisons, not those that blow them up, which is a line from the Boston anarchist Black Cross. It is said 1 ton of concrete can be ruined by pouring in 5 cups of sugar. So for moments, I imagine Biden's wall defeated by Abuela's pan dulce. I hurl conchas like grenades, keep a cuerno strapped to my waist, ready to fire la caña. Mis primos carried off hilltops on bare shoulders. Picture borders crumbling soft as de la Rosa's mazapan on mi lengua. I have always had a sweet tooth. I have always hated the dentist and loved to poke holes in the walls of a hater's imagination. Like you, I want to believe the most bitter bigot can be crushed by a handful of mercy, that one child's dream can bring a nightmare to its knees. But so little sugar only slows the hardening of concrete. Before long, even its sweet is petrified, the way a woman who has forgiven a man too many times slowly turns to stone. I want to believe there is enough dulce in my blood to stop the wall from setting, that I won't have to slit your sweet throat for my cups of sugar. And the last poem I am reading, weirdly enough, this reading falls 1 day before the anniversary of the rap album I released last year, Enter the Boom Ball, which is a mix of hip hop and reggaeton, with my brother making the beats. So to celebrate that, I wanted to end with this poem about a dope friend of mine and one of my favorite poets from Utah, Zach Ivy. We grew up together, and last year he dropped an album. And when I checked out the track list, I was like, "Why is my name one of the tracks?" And he was giving me a shout out for the work I've done, like, hustling at poetry throughout the years. So this is the rap I wrote in response that I wrote, released earlier this year. I want to end on it, especially to just acknowledge the important intersections of our work. Um, we can't be talking about the Great Salt Lake without also talking about like the prison systems, without also talking about the book bans, without also talking about all of these intersection issues at large, just because even when we try to, they keep clashing up against each other, like when the legislature prevented folks from being able to rename birds with like racist names, right? Like those are both, like they see how those things are connected. Um, and we should be seeing those connections too. This poem's called Zach Ivy. Used to hate Salt Lake. Those who came before me were erased, no trace. Racists would shake my faith, vandalize my name, and debate my fate. Made me ache for days and want to break my face to escape this place. Never thought I'd come back. Never thought a bard's bit ever have an impact. Used to be one of 2 Browns in class, had your cell, but they deported his ass. When your hood low, when your hood low and you've given all determination, when your master plan only left your hand with perspiration, shows empty, no matter the dedication, you have no idea who be finding inspiration. I knew this cat named Zach, homie always been cool, way cooler than me. I always felt like a fool, never really thought I ever made an impression, but listen, homeboy just taught me a lesson while I was second guessing, holding back. Zach said I was an inspiration of rap, so now the blessings come back. I've been sowing these seeds. Haters stayed mad, nah, they wouldn't believe. Breaks my heart when I see it. Hurting the crew, the illest poets in my city. Go through it too, messes me up when they say no one books me but you. I want to see this bastard child's dream come true. This for all the resonators, forget the haters and fools. For the slam poets getting banned and kicked out of schools. For all the teen survivors and all the queer youth. The most important person your art can save is you. The most important person your art can save is you. The most important person your art can save is you. The most important person your art can save is you. Thank you all so much for having me. I'll drop a link to buy the book independently in the chat, as well as albums. And we do have a Q&A function, so I can be typing responses as effect goes on. Thank you so much, Lisa, and all the amazing people who helped put this together.
Thank you so much, Willie. So through some creative problem solvings, Shanan is Brock Deshir right now. So Shanan, can you unmute and show your video? There we go. I can see it. It's happening. Okay, let me introduce Shanan while she catches her breath. We have had no end of problems with Zoom today, but I'm so glad to see your face, Shanan. Thank you, Brock. Okay, so Shanan Ballam is the Poet Laureate for Logan City, Utah. She's also the author of the Poetry Chapbook, the Red Riding Hood Papers, and 2 full-length poetry collections, Pretty Marrow and Inside the Animal, the collected Red Riding Hood poems. She's a senior lecturer at Utah State University, where she teaches poetry writing and composition. Her work has been widely published in fine journals. She's survived a massive stroke in January 2022 that paralyzed the entire right side of her body and robbed her of her language. Through a lot of difficult work, she has regained the ability to speak, as well as the use of her right hand and arm, though she is still struggling to walk. She never quit writing poetry, though, and has written a new chapbook about her experience, First Poems After the Stroke. Shanan, at last, here you are. Please read to us.
Okay, can you hear me? So thank you to Lisa for organizing this amazing festival. It is truly excellent. Thank you all for being here. Many people deserve thank yous, so thank you to my physical therapists, Lori and Jamie, and to my speech therapists, Natalie and Jamie, and to my counselor, Michael. Thank you to my friends, Rob and Dave, my sisters, Allison and Marcy, my mother, Sally, my dear friends and poetry group members, Star, Naomi, Isaac, Asher, Britt, and Millie. Poetry has been hugely important as I have regained my ability to speak. Thank you to the people who wrote generous blurbs for my book, Dave Lee, Eleanor Wilner, and my mentor, Bill Trowbridge, who has been my mentor ever since 2005, when I attended the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Thank you to my many friends and family members on the update list who have been on this stroke journey with me. I could not have done it without you. And thank you to Josh, my 3-year-old golden retriever. I wouldn't be here today without the courage of my husband, Brock. He has been my steadfast companion and a patient and loving man, and I wanted to thank him in front of all of you. He literally saved my life. My book is dedicated to him. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote for him. It doesn't appear in my book, but I wrote it in the early stages of my recovery. It's called If Love Exists for Brock. If love exists, it exists in thickets of grass, in the way you touch my hand, in the way the stream ripples over smooth stones, It exists in the crowns of poplar and ash. Love exists in snakes sliding through silky grasses. It exists in my brother's ashes. With your kiss, I vanish. We are the pitcher that pours the sweet water. We are the water. And so now I'm going to transition into poems that appear in my chapbook, first poems after the stroke. I'm going to read one short poem and then discuss it further. So this one is called Nobody. Nobody understands what it is like to have a stroke. Knees buckling and the crash to the bathroom floor. I called out to my husband for help. That was the last thing I said for 3 days. On January 9th, 2022, my life changed. I was getting ready for bed when my knees buckled and I fell to the floor. As the poem says, I managed to call out to my husband, Brock, for help. The door was locked, so Brock had to pry it open with his screwdriver. I had the distinct feeling that I could still talk. I thought I was just being quiet on purpose. I survived a massive stroke that wiped out my ability to talk. I had expressive aphasia. It also left my entire right side paralyzed. I have regained the use of my right hand and arm and almost all my speech. Stroke survivors can make gains for years after their strokes due to a phenomenon called neuroplasticity, which is the ability for the brain to reroute itself. I felt disconnected in my mind and body, so the poem's forms reflect that feeling. They are all written in lowercase too, because the poems wanted to be written that way. So I'm going to show you the form of this poem, if you can see that. I was in the hospital for a week and then intensive rehab for 3 weeks, where I relearned how to dress myself, shower, and take my first steps. To give you an idea of how little I was able to do, I could not even complete the simple action of turning my hand over. I could not tie my shoes. I learned that I couldn't take anything for granted. In the hospital, I experienced brain fog, which is common for stroke survivors. I was confused and had the distinct feeling that I was in a different room every day, but I wasn't. Here's a poem about how that felt. Called Kaleidoscope. Kaleidoscope. In the hospital, I lived inside, shadows and light ever shifting. Nurses dressed in blue, sifting in and out of my room like sand. I woke in a different room every day. Furniture was moved or missing. When I got home, I learned how to write by hand at home help by tracing letters on an erasable whiteboard with markers, a technique I learned from my speech therapist, Jamie Newcomb. I was able to write my name on my phone on February 12, 2022. At this time, I was able to write my first poems after the stroke. Well, I had written poems when I was in Ogden Regional Rehab Facility with Brock's help, but they were very simple. For instance, we have a golden retriever named Josh, and in the first poem I wrote after the stroke on January 20th, 2022, in a poem called Josh is a happy puppy when, we wrote, Josh is a happy puppy when he's playing with the TV, which doesn't make any sense. So to write the first real poems, I used a technique that my speech therapist, Natalie, taught me. And that was just to look around the room and out the window and describe what I saw. I was relearning how to write poetry as I had to relearn how to do everything else. I couldn't type yet, so I used dictation option in Microsoft Word, which means I could just talk and the computer would type what I said. So here is that poem. And it's called First Poem After the Stroke. Rain of beads dripping down, alert and determined, I wake from the fog of my life. A scream of snow on the branches of the crabapple tree. I am a monarch butterfly who will emerge with wet wings jeweled with dew. I am a monarch butterfly with wings jeweled and a stained glass heart. Bought me flowers from the grocery store. And here's a poem about that called Snapdragons for Brock. You bought me snapdragons from the grocery store. The blossoms are rust orange, but they are emerging blush pink and pale yellow near the top of the stalk. I pinch one to see inside its mouth. There, 3 sprigs dusted with gold pollen, and the soft, toothy trap designed to rub pollen off bumblebees' legs and feet. Today is the last Sunday in February. I had a massive stroke on the 9th of January. Today, I moved my big toe. You bought me Snapdragon. You are my hero. And there was a great horned owl roosting in our tree. It roosted there for about 6 weeks. And this is a poem about that. It appears in word gathering, and that's the reason a great horned owl appears on the cover of my book. So it's called The Dream. The Dream. The shiny taste of rain when I inhale. Love leads us back to the things of this world. The pink roses unfurl perfume. The moon is a white lily about to bloom. Having a stroke erases half the world, half your working body and your voice. The owl in the willow is a ghost. It calls to me through the open night window, calls to me in my dreams in smeared colors. It sounds like wind chimes. My lips taste like lilies, the cold scent of rain on stones, a dark curtain embroidered with light. The owl is a prophetess singing to me in my sleep. The owl is a part of the willow tree, a part of my heart, whispering, you will recover. Fragrance of lilies in a glass vase. The crabapple tree is dotted with pearls of rain. My lips taste like water. That is, they have no taste. The rain has turned to snow. It floats down in swirling spirals like falling into a dream. The wind chime speaks in the voice of God, like a waterfall, fluid, like the song of a canyon wren tumbling down the canyon. Last night I dreamed I could walk again. In April, Brock found some baby great horned owls in a nest in Wellsville on the path to Narrow Canyon. We drove over to see them, and I made it up the hill with my rolling walker, which was a feat at that time, and I was able to see the baby great horned owls through binoculars. Here's a poem about that experience. This one was published in Kaleidoscope. The owls. In the nest we spot them, two baby great horned owls, fluffy and camouflaged to look like decaying. Huge eyes, flecked with gold shimmer, stare out at us. A pink crabapple petal, thin as tissue paper, clings to my walker. Loosen your grip on helplessness and sorrow. The crocus petals are dusted with saffron, a wash of light on the ash tree, the gold light shining in the owl's eyes. Okay. Now I'm going to read 3 poems that were published in Sugar House Review, and they appear alongside one of Brock's poems about my aphasia and an interview with the two of us facilitated by Danielle Dabrowski. So thank you, Nat and Nano, who are the editors of the Sugar House Review. This first one is called Damage. The oxygen deprivation blossomed in the brain. It was almost beautiful if it hadn't been my brain. My right foot is numb, cold, and heavy as an anvil. I crashed to the tile floor. The blue and black bruise throbbed on my thigh. This is my life, trial. I claw my way through the cobwebs of aphasia, dull and empty, my brain. Snow on the crabapple branches again. I'm radiant with patience. I will not break. This next one is called Facing It. Facing it. I've lost the ability to walk. I can't do stairs or go uphill or downhill. I've lost my beautiful penmanship. But I can let go of things with my right hand. I used to grip so hard the handrail in rehab. I've relearned how to use chopsticks. I can open pill bottles and LaCroix cans. I haven't lost the ability to write poetry. I made it up and down little mountains, cascades of birdsong, then silence, graceful arcs, silver spray of sprinklers in the far field. 3 sandhill cranes flying in unison, 3 sandhill cranes dissolved into the mountain. A skunk plumes its luxurious black and white tail. A deer bounding. A monarch butterfly up close for the first time, flashing its wings, opening and closing its wings, perched on an elm leaf, mesmerizing near the river, perched on an elm leaf, opening and closing its wings near the river, opening and closing. And this last one that was published in Sugar House Review is called April. April. The willow tree is tangled with sunlight. Peace comes dropping slow. A waterfall of pink blossoms outside the window. The lily of the valley glows like pearls. I wore a spray in my hair on my wedding day, fragrant like a rainbow trembling. 4.5 months since I had the stroke. To know darkness, you must travel through darkness, its dense forest of pain. The light is tangled in my hair, on my eyelashes, bright as feathers. A single sandhill crane standing in dry lake like a prophet. I am no stranger to pain. I am afraid to feel. This suffering is smothering me like a rag stuffed in my mouth. Toss my losses into the river's gloss. I see a horse, a chestnut horse, munching meadow grass. It approaches me, comes closer, and my grief dissolves. A single red leaf, dotted with dew, turns on still water. I just got 2 more poems that I'll read. The stroke forced me to realize that nothing is permanent, that your life can change in an instant. And so this one is called Impermanence. The ditch flows, forget-me-nots sway underwater, blue and blurry, drowning eyes. I dose myself until I become a ghost, abyss of bliss. I'm lost in silence. I have vaguely considered suicide. A bird sings in the distance, in some far tree. A single white butterfly dips and flutters and dips. A single white butterfly. It's getting dimmer. The light falls slow. I hold to the hope that I'll be able to walk by the end of the summer. A few birds stain the sky. Last night, the skunk's dark fragrance wafted in the open window. Sunlight goldens the silky grass. A single white feather clings to the columbine. One buttercup remains on the path. Wild roses near the river, the petals of the last living rose drifted off sometime overnight. Ephemeral, this world and the things in it. A single sandpiper perches on the stick in the middle of the river. It appears every day. I wonder when it will disappear. And this is the final poem in the chapbook. And it's also the last poem I'm going to read. Called Beauty. Beauty. A slate blue dipper in the Logan River, dipping on thin lace. In the wetlands, silver strands of spider silk draped across the road, all at once and spontaneously spinning out silk, floating endlessly. 2 colts, one all black, a white star on its forehead, one chestnut brown with all white feet, followed me along the fence, nudging its velvet nose. 3 sandhill cranes sailing across a dust blue sky. A monarch butterfly on the path, motionless, dark orange, black outlines that look like they were drawn by a felt tip pen, ink bleeding, delicate antenna, legs, white spots on the body and wings. We thought it was dead, but in the car it started to move, unfolding its wings. When we got home, I laid it in the milkweed, breathing. Thank you.
Shanan and Willy, thank you so much for your beautiful readings. I'd just like to remind the audience that buying these 2 wonderful poets' books is very simple. Willy posted a link to his in the chat, but both books are available in the virtual book fair and reading room on the Utah Poetry Festival website. Thank you so much, Shanan. Thank you for your extra effort to get connected. And I think this has been a beautiful, beautiful night. Thank you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having us.